I love contemporary composers. I love John Adams' music. It's sort of all over the place. I love Radiohead. I love Coldplay. I love
Right.
electronic music. Obviously, jazz. There's very wide and very eclectic.
Do you think the Lakers can win another title?
You bet.
Any advice for your opponents?
Better watch out.
How are you?
I'm good. Nice to see you, Rana.
Nice to see you. Such an honor to talking to you. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So my first question is, as in a basketball team, you entered the second season to compose the music together with Robert Glasper, and previously it had been Nicholas Britell. How was it for you to insert yourself into this musical world of Winning Time, and how was the composition process?
Yeah, I actually joke with the producers when I was hired. My first job is not to mess it up because I loved what they did for the first season. But one of the fun things about doing this show was that I'm actually also people know me as a composer, but I'm also a jazz trumpet player.
I know.
So I was very excited that I could probably use a little bit of that language somehow in the writing. So there's something about the show that is sort of visceral, and it's got sports is kind of like an improvisatory thing. When you're on the court, like the great basketball players, they have a game plan, but they all sort of improvise and make it up as they go along. So there's this sort of swagger and intelligence to these people, which I really love, and there's sort of a beauty to that. Also, we have some great characters, and some it's definitely a period piece. So we're trying to give the audience the fun of the period, whether it's, the funky grooves or the emotional beats in the story. And one thing I really love about the second season is that, I feel like we get to go to some really interesting places emotionally with our characters in various ways in this season as well.
And the soundtrack of the series includes a lot of funk music, music from the 70s. Does this selection of songs influence you in a way when composing the score?
Somewhat. I mean, it's funny. I always see my job as a film composer is to be a storyteller.
Yeah.
So, a style of music is really just a vehicle through which the emotions and the beats of the story go. I mean, it's funny because one of the things I did in terms of taking that language and putting it into a more dramatic context. For example, we have some really great scenes in season 2 where there's a lot of arguing about the coach and Pat Riley, who's going to eventually, kind of ascend in this season, which is a very fun thing. But there's a lot of sort of tension. And I tried this thing that was just percussion in those scenes. And it was kind of like this, almost like this tribal feel. It's related to the funk, but it's obviously much more deconstructed musically. And it actually helps tell the story dramatically of the tension, but it still gives you the sense that there's this sort of ticking clock or this sort of energy out there somewhere, if that makes any sense. I think another thing that influenced it was obviously instrumentation. I tried to really have the music that I worked on with Robert for this season be related very much in terms of the color of the sounds, and this sort of keep a very similar palette in the second season as well.
Yeah. And talking about Robert Glasper, he came from the world of jazz, and he also worked for years with some important hip hop artists. What did you learn working with him for this score?
No, I mean, I love that whole, and that's really part of the aesthetic of the show. It's like this kind of idea of the whole kind of remix idea, the drum loops. I mean, we pretty much used live drummers, but after, there was kind of a fun sort of DJing approach to a lot of this music. Like we would have a session with the band, and then later on, I might take some of those elements that they played and sort of play around with them or DJ them a little bit. It's kind of like what the hip hop guys would do. Yeah. I really enjoyed Robert as a collaborator because even though he's known as he really thinks like a composer all the time, even when he's playing piano. I mean, some of my favorite tracks from the live sessions are with the whole band, but there's a point when he just stops playing and lets the other guys go, and there's something about that energy, like knowing when to just leave space, which I think comes from playing jazz. I think it comes from being a producer. A good hip hop artist knows instinctually how to sort of paint with sound, and I think that's a lot of what we're trying to do with the score.
Oh, great. So I have this album here. I read on your website that your grandmother was a pianist and an avid jazz fan, and she gave you this album when you was beginning trumpet studies. So how does this album influence your musical career, and does it have any influence today on your way of composing?
You know, I'm so glad you had the actual thing there, because it was actually I kind of like got a little verklempt, as they say in New York, when I saw that. But listen, you know, that record especially blew me away. It was Miles playing. It was the beauty of Gil Evans orchestrating, and that sense of sophistication but improvisation totally influenced, I would say, all the choices I still make to this day. I mean, it was a very sort of auspicious thing that happened to me when I was very, very young, just starting as an artist.
Yes, awesome. And these days, are there any new artists that influence you?
You know, well, I've been really, you know, I'm very grateful, because I feel like when I had the opportunity to do House of Cards, that I was one of the first guys to kind of like raise the bar for what's happening in TV. Yeah. And so for me, it's been really satisfying to see people like Nick Burtrell and I forget Granson. I forget to say Ludwig Granson. These people that sort of come after me and sort of made a name for themselves. I feel like I love hearing what the next generation of composers is doing, and also the way in which I feel like the way this world of premium cable TV and streaming has really opened up the world of creativity to music making. That's really especially satisfying to me. I also love classical music. I listen to a lot of classical music. I love contemporary composers. I love John Adams' music. You know, it's sort of all over the place. I love Radiohead. I love Coldplay. I love electronic music. Obviously jazz. There's very wide and very eclectic.
That's awesome. Jeff, in general, you compose at home without assistants or orchestrators, and you play most of the instruments yourself. Why?
You know, I think it really connects to my first love as being a music maker. And of course, like when I need musicians, I use them. But I generally love playing on my own scores when they're instruments that I play. You know, it really started in a very specific way years ago when I did another show for HBO, wonderful series Rome, which we did back in the early 2000s, I believe, or mid 2010s. And in that particular show, there was no way to do it with samples or anything. You really need to get instruments. So I started acquiring all these really exotic things. I got recorders, and you see a frame drum there. There's actually an oud behind me there, you know. So I started really getting into this idea of being a music maker and sort of a tinkerer a little bit, you know. An artist, you know, that also performs. I think that really connects back to my jazz, actually, because I feel like for me, part of the compositional process is actually the performative aspect of just simply playing something and seeing what comes out and seeing how the performance influences maybe the musical texture and the idea. There's one cue in Winning Time. I know we're almost out of time, but there's one cue in Winning Time which I heard on last week's episode, which I really like. It's kind of a very good example of that. But there's a very intense, sad beat. I think it's with Magic, but you know, there's just a cue I did that's just solo trumpet, no other instruments. And so that's about as simple and bare as you can get. But sometimes in film, that very simple, pure gesture can be really, really effective.
Great. Jeff, my last question is, what's your favorite character on the Winning Time series? And why?
Oh boy, this is tough. You know, I think I have two. I mean, it's really hard to pick one.
I know.
All right, I'm gonna go with Pat Riley. I'll tell you why, because I love the actor, first of all.
Yes,
I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
But also I like the idea of a person whose destiny is not preordained. In fact, may even be a surprise to them. And I love the way in which I think he's got probably one of the most interesting arcs in the whole series, in the sense that, you know, last season he was like this bumbling guy just trying to learn how to be a commentator. Just a way in which sometimes life grabs you by the reins and throws you into the spotlight. It's this moment of truth that we often find, you know, as humans, we have maybe a few moments like this in our life when we've got to sink or swim. So there's something about that journey, that story, which just kind of really, I think, is appealing to me.
Yes, he's one of my favorites too. Jeff, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Really pleasure to meet you. Thank you for the sketches of Spain. That was amazing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.